This is Iowa Talking Points, The Candidates, produced by Studio 5 at Mud Advertising, Totally Iowa Media, and News Talk 1540 KXCL, where you hear from the candidates in contested races in the June 2026 Iowa primary election. Now, Iowa Talking Points, The Candidates. From Studio 5 at Mud and Cedar Falls, here is Jeff Stein.
Hello and welcome. There will be a new Iowa governor in January of 2027. It's an open seat due to the retirement of Governor Kim Reynolds after nearly a decade in the job. And there are 5 Republicans seeking their party's nomination to be on the November general election ballot. And one of them joins us here at the Iowa Talking Points table today. He is Zach Lahn. You find him online, zachlahn.com. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Why run for governor?
You know, I get the question a lot, as you could probably imagine, but I got into this race largely because I believe that we're seeing some long-term systemic issues that our state's been facing. I often talk about the culture, the history, the heritage of our people in our state, and how things are changing rapidly for us. And so, I've never ran for office before. I've never held office. This wasn't something I was planning on doing right now. But my campaign's been focused on 4 key issues, which I think are not left or right issues. They're just Iowa issues. And that is, number one, we're losing our kids faster than 46 other states. You can't build a culture, maintain your traditions, or build an economy if you're losing your people. Number 2 is that we've lost 10,000 family farms over the past 20 years. At the same time, if you look out and you talk to farmers, and like I do, we operate our family farm today, you see that a lot of our land, full 25% at least, is owned by out-of-state investors and funds who don't live in our state. They're not shopping on Main Street. They're not going to Friday night football games. And we're watching as young people can't get onto farms. So we're losing that heritage and that culture that we love as Iowans. The third one is that, we were once number 1 in the nation for education. I grew up north of Sioux City and I graduated from Sioux City East High School. And we're now in the bottom half. And I think that plays a lot into some of the deeper issues that we're talking about, starting at the top of losing our kids. Parents want good education opportunities for their kids in the state they live in. And the fourth, and this has become a bit of a flashpoint for my campaign, is that we have the fastest rate of new cancer ever recorded in the history of the world. And that's not hyperbole. There's about 212 jurisdictions that measure cancer rates. Iowa's is rising faster than any ever has. And so what I say to people is, we're losing the wisdom of a generation. So we have these long-term systemic issues that I think for a long time both parties have kind of turned away from. And there's reasons for that we'll probably talk about. But I'm running because I believe we need to solve those issues and set Iowa up for success in 30, 40, and 50 years.
Let's start with the first issue you mentioned, and that's population. We have documented brain drain. The reports from Common Sense Institute Iowa show the impact financially over the course of working life of those sorts of things. How do you help Iowa kids who'd really like to stay in Iowa? How do you help them find their full potential here?
I think first we have to look at what we have to offer them. And we have the best thing that we could offer them first off, which is their families, their home, where they grew up, the memories they've had, being around grandma and grandpa, all of those things, which is ultimately, I was one of these kids. I grew up in Western Iowa, but I thought I had to leave to find something better. But after I started having kids, I wanted to come home. And so I think number 1, we have that. But number 2, the question is, do we have the opportunity for them to come back when they're ready to come back? And so as governor, I look at the levers that we can pull. And some of the biggest things I'm talking about in our campaign, it's about putting Iowa first. One of those things is, how do we incentivize Iowa's homegrown businesses and entrepreneurs to build companies here and stay here? And we're spending a tremendous amount of money giving tax breaks, refundable tax credits to publicly traded companies, even foreign companies. There's a Chinese government-owned company that's getting millions of dollars of refundable tax credits from the citizens of Iowa. My point on this lever that we can pull, which is one of the biggest ones we can pull on the economic side, is that we should be using those dollars to promote Iowa's homegrown businesses, companies that are going to be here for 10, 20, 40, 50 years, and that multiple generations are going to want to take part in. And the reason I say that is, those companies, when the economy gets bad, they're the last people to cut jobs. Oftentimes, and these are companies I've talked to, Kinsey Manufacturing, Latham Seeds, VT, these companies that are Iowa homegrown business success stories, they're actually competing against these companies we're giving welfare to. So my point is, with the limited resources we have to spend, invest in the companies that are going to keep Iowans hired for the longest and be here for the longest. And so when the economy does get bad, they're the last people to lay off their friends, neighbors, people to go to church with, and people that are on Main Street with. And so that's an Iowa First policy to really help bolster the economy for the long term, not the short term.
Is that not, although part of the problem, if you have international publicly traded stock companies, and we have some who are based in Iowa, but still there's a responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, and it's not the same as it used to be when you might have a good community-minded business that would be willing to take less in revenue because they'd be able to help families in the town.
I think that we can actually do both here. And it's not anti-development of large companies. Part of what I'm saying is, look, if you want to come here and benefit from our incentives, which we have a limited amount to give, move your headquarters here, have your CEO live here, participate in our communities. But for the limited amount that we have to give, I want it to go into Iowa's homegrown businesses. My goal is to help them compete with these companies, help them become the next success story like that. And so I think we have opportunity to do this in the state. And again, we welcome other companies to come here. But here's what I'd say. If you graduate from an Iowa high school or an Iowa college and you move out of state, you go to Nashville or Austin or Denver, and you have a resume that says you're from Iowa, what's one of the first things they say? We love hiring Iowans. My whole point is I love hiring Iowans too. I want to keep those people here in our state, and I want more businesses to want to move here because of the quality of life, because of the culture that we have, and to put down deep roots in our state. But right now we're seeing a lot of these tax incentives go to places they shouldn't. We're giving hundreds of millions of dollars in welfare to data centers that are, multinational $100 billion companies. They do not need a handout from the people of Iowa. And we have limited resources to do this with. And so my main effort here is to promote Iowa businesses first, and to say that if we're going to be giving money and incentives to help grow business, let's start here with the companies that have helped build our state already.
One of the items you mentioned, the family farm, and it is very difficult for young people to get into farming. First, you have a finite amount of acres. If you want to succeed your parents on the family farm, well, you might have a few siblings who want to do the same thing, and so it already is hard to pencil out. What would you do to try to maintain not just the ownership, but the way of life that so many of us think is unique to Iowa?
That's one of the best ways I've heard it phrased, because it is a way of life for us. It is about our culture and heritage. And also, we're a welcoming state. We welcome people that want to come here and participate in that way of life. I first look at what are some of the problems we're facing as a state. Well, number one, we actually don't know who owns the land in our state. We see tremendous amount of influx of capital coming in to buy land, to raise land prices, raise rental rates. With that, we see an increase in property taxes, all of these things, and it's an artificial inflation. People ask me, how much land does the country of China own in Iowa? And the political answer to that is, well, none, because it's illegal. But the true answer is, we don't require human-level disclosure of who owns our land. So one of the first things I'm calling for is either by regulation or legislation, we deserve to know who's owning the land in Iowa. And we do have anti-corporate farming laws on the books that we should be very thankful for Robert Ray passing in the 1970s, which, by the way, a Democrat House and Senate passed the legislation, a Republican governor signed it because it was the right thing to do for Iowa. Unfortunately, enforcement of that has become very difficult. We now see large organizations owning 10, 20, 30,000 acres in the state, and they're exploiting loopholes that they weren't intended to be. So I'm calling for divestment of that after we tighten those restrictions and regulations back up the way they were intended, so we can get prices under control so the next generation can carry on the legacy to farm. But the other big issue that I talk to farmers about often, they talk to me about, and we've experienced it, is that when I was growing up in Iowa, we had 300 to 400 seed, input, fertilizer companies selling products to our farmers. We had a robust economy there and a lot of competition. That's been consolidated. There's now 3 companies that control 85% of the market. We've long passed the stage of a monopoly and anti-competitive behavior. Heck, we even have a long-term Iowa business, Latham Seeds, has been here for 3 generations. Just a couple weeks ago, they filed an antitrust suit against Bayer for anti-competitive practices. We have got to start enforcing our antitrust laws again. We have to. Teddy Roosevelt was one of my favorite presidents. He famously broke apart two of the largest companies in existence, J.P. Morgan and Standard Oil. Monopolies are a failure of the free market. Our farmers deserve competition and true markets so they can lower input costs, which will help them raise their margins. And when they do, that gives them a chance to pass something on to their kids and also experiment with other types of farming. The final thing I'll say on this is that I'm calling to incentivize other types of farming. We operate a regenerative farm in Belle Plaine today. Actually, I just put out a post today about we're growing einkorn. My wife likes to bake bread with it and make pancakes for the kids. But right now, on razor-thin margins, it's very difficult to experiment in any way. So some of the things we can do as a state level, I'm calling for 80% of the food served in Iowa's public schools to come from the state of Iowa. If we do that, we create a market and get people off the sideline where they say, we can actually support a family doing this, and we'll start to see a transition to more profitable farming that will benefit our local communities.
And again, USDA does some of this, some of the commodity groups do it, where if you want to engage in certain things like cover crops or experimentation with watersheds, there's a way to pay for some of that input on the front end. And if it works for you, it can cash flow after that.
Exactly
that
right.
kind of assistance.
That kind of assistance on the state level. For a long time, many of these programs have been aimed at the biggest producers. I'm trying to flip that on its head to say the little guys, the people that are operating the family farms that have diversified operations, we want to find ways to help them tremendously. Because the more we can get that, the more we get back to sort of the heritage of the state and agriculture that built Iowa, truly. And so, it has to be a lot of different options. But right now, I think where we can benefit the most is by creating new markets to incentivize other types of farming, both in crops and in animals, to diversify and help lift the boat for our rural communities.
He's Zach Lahn. Mr. Lahn is a Republican seeking the nomination of his party for governor in the June primary. More as Iowa Talking Points, the candidates, continues in just a moment.
All the great news talk programs you love from KXCL on your radio can be with you wherever you go.
I'm Todd Starnes.
This is Mark Levin.
I'm Tim Harwood.
Bill O'Reilly here.
I'm Kim Commando.
Hey, it's Glenn Beck.
I'm Jeff Stein.
Just download the free KXCL mobile app. You can find us in the App Store or Google Play. Make sure you never miss a second of the conversation. Download the KXCL app today. It's a great way to stay connected to where Iowa comes to talk.
One opportunity. Change your career. Mudd Advertising is hiring product specialists. $20 an hour, paid weekly. That's 52 weeks a year, plus record-breaking profit sharing. Let me repeat, $20 an hour plus record-breaking profit sharing. But we're just getting started. The best in the business, 401k, company match, gold standard health plans, on-site fitness center, generous paid time off, and so much more. Apply today and don't look back.
You're watching Iowa Talking Points, the candidates. Here again is Jeff Stein.
And we continue with Zach Lahn. Mr. Lahn is a candidate for governor in the Republican primary to be held on June 2nd. ZachLahn.com is the website. We'll pick up the conversation on issues in your platform in a bit, but tell people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Western Iowa. My dad was a pastor, a conservationist out there. I graduated from Sioux City East, as I mentioned, and I was like a lot of kids. I thought I had to leave, and I ended up in Colorado going to college and spent a little bit of time outside of Iowa. I got into business. I helped to build and buy companies. Did that for a good amount of time. Helped to start schools. Our first school we started was in Wichita, Kansas, and now we have helped build a network of over 300 innovative schools across the country. But a big change for me came when my family came to Iowa in about 1850. And my great-great-great-grandfather, he was actually one of the Hawkeyes on horseback in the Civil War. And so it's a really, really amazing heritage there. But great-grandpa built the farm in 1900, and we sold it in 2005, like many Iowa families have seen happen. And, in 2014, I had the opportunity to buy the farm back. And I did. And so we now live on our family's homestead. We spent a number of years restoring that farm board by board using old pictures from great-grandma's photo collection. Bought it in 2014, and now we are in Belle Plaine, Iowa, helping to restore some things in the community, like the community theater as well, and things like that. And so that's where a lot of this comes back to for me when I'm thinking about these rural issues, especially, is how do we build our rural communities? It's not something I've just talked about. I've been really actively working long before I thought about running for governor to do exactly this, and that's where my heart is.
And I have to ask, because as you note, this is your first run at elective office, and it's a significant position. Doesn't mean one has to have a whole bevy of electoral experience before, but why choose to enter public service at this level?
You know, I think I look at where I can affect the most change. That's really what I look at. And when I looked at the governor's race being open, I don't think anybody expected Kim Reynolds to say that she wasn't going to be running anymore. I think largely she's done a great job on many issues. The legislature has really worked to make life more affordable. Obviously, I think we all would agree there's more work to be done. But when I look at the issues I'm running on, the issues I care about and talk to my family about, my neighbors about, it really comes down to deep, systemic, long-term issues that I think the governor can lead on those things. And my goal is to be the person that's willing to take the arrows to go out and say that we're going to accomplish these things for the people of Iowa. And so I looked at the seat being open. I really saw an opportunity because the seat hadn't been open in 20 years. I have experience in business as an executive. I've helped build companies and buy them. And I've also been involved in agriculture and education. I think it's a well-rounded background to step into a role like governor and help to reform some of these agencies and some of these things that we've been having trouble with for quite a long time.
You have taken, as I understand it, a firm position on the issue of carbon capture pipelines and eminent domain. That is something that appears to be beyond the scope of what the legislature was able to do this year. Previous year it was vetoed, so it certainly will be at the top of the list for the next governor. What's your position on the property rights issue?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to couch it too. It's a property rights issue in my mind. I often talk about the history of our state. Our ancestors actually didn't come here for religious freedom. They already largely had it in Europe. The Reformation had happened, but they were in a feudal society. They couldn't own the ground under their feet. And many of them came over for that exact purpose, to own the ground under their feet, build their churches in their communities, and pass something on to their kids. And so when I look at something like using eminent domain for private gain, for me, it's a hard no on the use of eminent domain. We know how to build pipelines. We've been building pipelines thousands of miles for many, many years. More so for me, this is about private property rights and who's going to protect those. And I believe it's the governor's job to make sure that as we're looking at legislation or appointments to boards like the Iowa Utilities Commission, that they're going to protect the fundamental rights of Iowans. And that's where I stand on that.
There are a lot of dollars attached to some of those projects, and some of the people who are in favor of the projects make campaign donations. So that's a difficult headwind for some people. What's your response to those who talk about the money aspect of that issue?
I think this is what Iowans have been looking for, is someone who is not looking at that aspect of it and saying, I'm going to do what special interests said. We have a rich history in Iowa going all the way back to James Harlan and George Wallace Jones of fighting on behalf of the people against the special interests. I'm not asking them for money. I haven't went out and tried to court their money. I'm not looking for it. I'm really looking to do what's right for the people of Iowa for the long term. And I think this is just one of those common sense issues. But the point you bring up is not just about carbon capture. It's about many different areas of government. And we can see on the federal level especially how captured agencies can be. Whether it's the EPA, HHS, just how much industry has gotten their hands into the regulatory functions of our government. And I'm running largely as a repudiation of that, to say that these entities, these agencies are here to work on behalf of the people of the state. That's what the government's there for. I believe that the economy of the state, the government of the state, should be focused on making life better for the people who live in the state. I'm not worried about multinational $100 billion companies. I want them to be here if they want to be here and benefit our communities. But my first point is to make sure that the people of Iowa feel a good support and defense and that somebody's advocating for them. That's why I'm running.
The other individuals who are seeking the nomination each have some form of government service, elective office, or closely tied to the government. Mm-hmm. You'd be coming in, as I analyze it from the outside. What's the benefit of that?
I think it's the same thing in business as I looked at buying a company. Coming in with a fresh perspective is so important because, oftentimes, as I read on the back of a book that you guys wrote, you can't read the label from inside the bottle. I read that on the back of your guys' book, and I read that and I thought, I think the same thing. Oftentimes, coming in from the outside is a huge benefit because you're looking at it from a different perspective. I think both the education perspective I bring, the business perspective I bring, the agriculture perspective I bring, it's from having done it and had to deal with things that citizens are dealing with. And so I really believe that's an added plus and advantage. And I believe Iowans look for outsiders. We look for people that are going to come in and not have allegiances to others, but have allegiances to the people. And that's really where I'm coming to this from.
He's Zach Lahn. Mr. Lahn is a Republican seeking his party's nomination for governor. ZachLahn.com is the website. We'll continue the conversation as Iowa Talking Points, the candidates, continues after this break.
One opportunity. Change your career. Mudd Advertising is hiring product specialists. $20 an hour, paid weekly. That's 52 weeks a year, plus record-breaking profit sharing. Let me repeat, $20 an hour plus record-breaking profit sharing. But we're just getting started. The best in the business, 401k, company match, gold standard health plans, on-site fitness center, generous paid time off, and so much more. Apply today and don't look back.
Watch all the programs in the Iowa Talking Points series online at iowatalkingpoints.com. Iowa Talking Points, the candidates, continues with Jeff Stein.
And we continue with Zach Lahn. Mr. Lahn is a Republican running for governor. ZachLahn.com is the website. And in the prior segment, I mentioned that your four opponents in this primary each have some level of government service, either elective office or they've taken a government paycheck. But I'll let you tell the listeners and viewers, what separates you from these other four in addition to the things we mentioned a moment ago?
I think it really comes down to the issues I'm wanting to cover. I talk about those four key systemic issues. And I think what's so beneficial for the people of Iowa on these is they're not left or right issues. It doesn't matter if you're left or right. You don't want Iowa's kids leaving Iowa. It doesn't matter if you're left or right. You don't want our family farms dying off, our public education system in the bottom half. And you definitely don't want your friends, family, and neighbors getting cancer. And so I think taking on these long-term issues is really what separates our campaign. We've seen a tremendous response from the people of Iowa, and I'm very thankful for that because I believe that they're just issues we all should care about. Especially the last issue I mentioned on the cancer crisis. I'm having town halls where, on small towns might be 80 people, and larger towns, 200 people are showing up. And one of the most common questions I'm getting, comments as people wait to talk to me afterwards, is about cancer. It's affected everybody's life. And I believe we just haven't been giving it its due when we're trying to solve this problem that is affecting so many of us.
I recall moving to a town in northeast Iowa a quarter century ago, and they said, for some reason, we just have a high cancer rate in this town. Well, it was right on a river. Mm-hmm. And so we are now putting dots together to suggest that perhaps it has to do with chemicals, but we don't know, I don't think, a lot of these. So how does the governor then lead on this issue, which, to your excellent point, we've really started noticing as these latest reports and statistics have come in?
Yeah, I think it affects everybody in Iowa. My dad spent his life in the fields and then developed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And, he's in remission, but I have a shorter time with him. It's a deep, deep issue. When you look at what we're actually facing in Iowa, if you choose to move from Iowa to Nevada, which has a high smoking rate, your likelihood of getting cancer in any given year drops by 40%. That's something that just shouldn't be. The top 10 counties for cancer in the state, your lifetime risk is 1 in 2. And so I think for a very long time, we have been taking our eye off the ball on this. And I think if you want to know why, people ask why. Well, I think we know, follow the money, oftentimes. But There are things we can do about this, but I've been very clear that you have to be able to address the elephant in the room. And that to me is that for a very long time, we've been lied to by big agricultural companies about the safety of their products to protect their bottom line. Our farmers have been lied to, our communities have been. And we have to have accountability there. A couple of things I'm calling for is, number one, the state of Iowa should be doing independent research on the safety of products. We have the role to do that. The EPA largely has been captured for a very long time by industry. But number two is that there's a big push by Bayer right now to get immunity from lawsuit, both in the 22 state houses they're trying to, in the Farm Bill, which just got pulled out by the Maha movement largely, in the Supreme Court in the Darnell case, and through executive order. I think it's very clear that no company should have immunity from liability. Liability is a key function of the free market. If your product harms somebody, that person should have recourse to make sure that they are compensated for that harm. And it also is a signal to make your product safer. But one of the things we haven't talked about very much, and we're starting to now a lot more, Governor Reynolds and Mike Nag even talked about it just recently, is the water quality issue in the state. I'm the son of a 30-year conservationist. I grew up talking about water quality with my dad all the time. And, farmers have been operating on razor-thin margins for a very long time. One of the best technologies to increase yield has been pattern tiling. And we have used pattern tiling because it increases yield, it makes your farm more farmable. But on the other end of it, we're daylighting directly into streams, and nitrogen's a water-soluble molecule. It attaches there. But here's the good thing that I say, no farmer wants to spend more money on inputs. They don't want to lose their product. So we have solutions to this. Saturated buffers up at Bear Creek removed 100% of the nitrate load. There's a USDA cost share on that right now. We can also provide refundable tax credits for deep banding or knifing in nitrogen lower where it's needed, so it doesn't just get washed off the top. And that will decrease the nitrate load in some instances by 30 to 50%, also saving farmers money. My big point on this is that we can't ignore it anymore. There's issues that are happening in the urban settings too, with lawn chemicals and all of those things. We have to start saying we're going to solve this, because it doesn't matter if you're urban or rural. We're all drinking the water, and we need to solve it. The high nitrate load in water is one of the top causes of colorectal cancer, which is one of the fastest killing cancers there is. We can solve this problem. We have the solutions to do it. It's time to come together and do it.
Who would be responsible for the independent testing of some of these chemicals? Is this Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, and how do you find the resources for it? Because I can just feel the pushback from people who will say, well, if EPA says it's okay and Iowa's the only state that, for example, says it isn't, then we're going to have a real problem with these companies because they're not going to want to market anything to Iowa, et cetera.
Well, I think the first thing is what we're talking about is just getting the truth in science. And that's something we should all just be able to count on and come together on. But I go back to my campaign of being Iowa first. We have arguably one of the best medical research hospital or colleges in the country. And we also have one of the best agricultural college in the country. I think that having a directive from the Board of Regents to start to tackle this problem, because they're accepting state funds. For a long time, universities have been focused on global problems. Well, we have local problems that we need help with. And our universities were set up to help prepare people to go into their state and make a difference and build companies and businesses. And on the research end, to make life safer and healthier for the people who live here. So I actually believe we have a great lever to pull here with our universities to step in and say, regardless of who's donated or whatever may happen, that we're here to find the truth. And the goal is not to ban products. The goal is to have truth so we know what the risks are for using these products, so farmers and other people can take the necessary precautions.
So let's pick up, before we close this segment, on higher education. We'll circle back to K-12 in a moment, but the Board of Regents at times has issued mandates or suggestions about things, and sometimes those Regents institutions are not very happy about being told what to do. How do you navigate those waters as governor with a Board of Regents, with a legislature, and the concept broadly of academic freedom?
Yeah, well, I think what we can talk about here is what comes back to is what leverage do we have? And I think the financial incentive is a pretty big one. But also there's also just the part of doing the right thing. We need this as a state. We need help. And we have the resources to bear in terms of the staff and faculty that have been tremendously well trained. Drake University is doing some of these things right now in water quality. I spoke to one of their classes just last week. We have students that also want to help. So I think it comes down to just doing the right thing. But at times you do have to say, hey, if we're getting too caught up in something else, a global problem, when we have local problems here, we are going to apply pressure through the regions to do the right thing for the people of Iowa. And that's what putting Iowa first is all about.
And as you look at, and you've mentioned this a few different times, going back to the Ray era, they did it because it was the right thing to do. Is there a danger that because things have become so hyper-partisan these days, you're hard-pressed to find topics where the two sides can come to great agreement? Now, if you're governor, no matter how the November election turns out with the legislature, I think everybody agrees the Republicans will still have a reasonable majority in both houses. But how do you then, as governor, bring people together? What kind of experience do you have in business, et cetera, that you can use as a transferable skill to encourage people and make sure they do the right thing?
Well, just to directly answer your question in business, when I come into a new company, and I'm unknown and I'm owning it now, there's a lot that has to happen to earn the trust of people there, and especially as you start to change directions of the company, of people that have been there for a long time. But here's the good news on this. I'm telling you, I'm seeing every day, every week, we have people sending us messages saying, you're the first Republican I'm ever going to vote for because you're actually tackling these large issues that are facing our state. You're talking about water quality. I believe there's a narrative shift that's happening in our state right now because politicians on both sides are saying we can't ignore these things anymore. I hope I can be a part of that. I hope I have been a part of that. But the beauty of the issues that we're talking about is that when you have good faith actors that actually care about the future of the state, which I believe there's a lot of them on both sides of the aisle, you can be a unifying voice like Robert Ray was to bring people together for the right thing. Passing anti-corporate farming laws in the state was meant to protect the heritage and the culture of a state, which both Republicans and Democrats participate in. So I believe the hyper-partisan nature has been very bad for our state and our people. And I believe in large part, sometimes it's been done on purpose to divide us as a people. And there's many reasons for that, but there's also groups and entities that benefit from this. So I absolutely am looking forward to working with both sides on solving these issues. And I think we can because it's the right thing to do. And I believe many people have a good heart and want to help the state of Iowa.
Zach Lahn is our guest. He is a Republican running for governor. ZachLahn.com is the website. One more segment as Iowa Talking Points, the candidates, continues in a moment. Iowa has a wonderful heritage, and each day I'll share these stories of historic people and events with you. I'm Jeff Stein. Join me for the Iowa Almanac program and learn more about this great place we call home. Now 7 days a week. Listen on radio stations across the state, via podcast, or at iowaalmanac.com.
One opportunity. Change your career. Mud Advertising is hiring product specialists. $20 an hour, paid weekly. That's 52 weeks a year, plus record-breaking profit sharing. Let me repeat, $20 an hour plus record-breaking profit sharing. But we're just getting started. The best in the business, 401k, company match, gold standard health plans, on-site fitness center, generous paid time off, and so much more. Apply today and don't look back.
You're watching Iowa Talking Points, the candidates. Here again is Jeff Stein.
A few more minutes with Zach Lahn. Mr. Lahn is a Republican. He's running for governor in the June 2nd primary. ZachLahn.com is the website. One of the four key points you mentioned was education. We talked about higher ed a moment ago. Let's talk K-12. How is it that Iowa got from tops in the nation to where we are now?
I think there's a lot of different things that have happened, but ultimately I think we've taken the eye off the ball of what really matters in education. That comes down to the foundational pieces of it, of learning critical thinking, clear speaking, good writing, the basics of reading, writing, math, these types of things. But also I think, there's been an attempt to politicize education for a very long time. And I think that that's also taken away from the quality. I talk about education a lot. I talk about the education savings accounts. I started schools myself. I know the value that those bring. And I believe that they're foundational freedoms to parents to have more say over where their tax dollars are spent and more say over where their kids go to school. But I think it goes back to your question of what's the role of the governor here? And I believe the role of the governor is to be the number one advocate for public school kids in the state. And I believe that that's what we have to do to make our public schools better. One of the things I'm most excited about is to bring my experience in innovative education to the state level. And so there's two key issues I look at here. One is quality, and the other is culture. But on the quality side, the governor can actually create innovation zones in education in the state to help these teachers who really want to serve students in a different way, in a better way, to have less red tape and be able to, use different methods. I trained many public school teachers on how we would operate as schools. The problem was when they got back to the classroom, they couldn't implement anything. And so we have the ability to...
Why? Because they didn't have the knowledge, or because they were being blocked from higher up?
Largely from being blocked from higher up. They have the knowledge, and they're very curious. They see this happening across the country. But that's a great question, because they're teaching to test lots of the time, rather than looking at what is this child struggling with? How do we help meet their needs? But this also goes back to another issue our teachers are facing in the classroom. You talk to a public school teacher, they'll tell you 95% of their time is spent with 5% of the students. These are students who are having true behavioral issues, true trouble integrating in the classroom. And I say to people, these are kids that are crying out for help. And the teacher's not a behavioral therapist. They need off-ramps that are not punitive to help them solve these problems. Could be malnutrition, could be problems at home, there could be sleeping in a car. But we need to get them out of the classroom into a setting that can serve them better so we can restore them and bring them back into the classroom. So that's one of the biggest pieces on culture. But on quality, it really comes down to innovation and what's been being done across the country for decades. I spent 2 years of my life visiting the most innovative schools in the country. Visited about 70 different schools as I prepared to start my own schools. There's unbelievable things that are going on in education that we can bring into our classrooms, and our teachers are begging to have that option to do that, and I want to support them.
A lot of our public school districts, primarily in large cities, it appears, are running huge financial deficits. And it's not all attributable to loss of revenue from the education savings account. So how do you as governor then see small schools, small public schools or consolidated districts, then you have these big schools that are having fiscal issues, and then you have the explosion in the number of private opportunities. How does the governor balance all of that, or try to make sure that the eye is back on the ball?
Well, number one, I think for citizens, it's very important to vote in your local elections. The budgets for many of these entities are coming out of local election results. And so you need to make sure you're having fiscally conservative people here that understand that we need to make sure that we're not wasting money. There's been an explosion in administrative roles within schools. And schools have, in large part, many times, lost sight of what they're really here for, which is the primary teaching of critical thinking and these things that we talked about a minute ago. But, I think when we look at what can be done here, the education savings accounts are, I said, largely a foundational freedom. The problem that we're having, though, is that in the 1990s, when I was a kid and we were number one in the nation for education, we've now dropped 26 points. And we've increased per pupil funding by 50% adjusted for inflation. So we're actually seeing an increase in spending and a decrease in quality. And this goes back to the innovation I'm talking about that's possible there. But we also need to make sure that our teachers and our curriculum are there not to push any other agenda, but to serve the students in the classroom and help them learn the basics. There are many instances of political agendas being pushed in classrooms, and our parents are not sending kids to school for this. So I really think it gets back to the foundational basics that we need to focus on as a state. And as we do that, we can see likely we will be able to cut some of the spending that's happening, some of the bloat that's happening in these administrative bodies, and return that back to funds used to actually educate kids.
What do people not understand about you and your background, or what is it that's being portrayed inaccurately? In other words, what's floating out there that you hear about that you may want to either set the record straight or make sure people get the accurate information? Because this is the time of a campaign when all manner of things are said.
There's a tremendous amount of things you'll hear in a campaign. There's many things I'm learning about myself for the very first time, actually. But, I think when somebody like me comes in, people are saying, well, where did he come from? Why is he running? And we've been doing as much long form content as we possibly can, because this isn't something where I ran for an office and then ran for another office and now I'm stepping into this. This is something where I'm saying, I believe we've not been paying attention to the systemic issues that we should. And, for a long time, I've been in business. I've also been involved in, nonprofit work. But I think people say, well, where's the funding coming from? That's one of the large ones. And, largely we're self-funding our campaign. Through success in business, I've been able to do a lot of these things. And so, we're not accepting any large contributions from, PACs or corporations or anything like this. We're really saying, hey, we're here to put our resources into play because it's the right thing to do. But also we're seeing a tremendous amount of interest from small dollar donations. And I'm very thankful for that. But this is an Iowa First campaign.
You are asking Iowa Republicans and anyone who registers for the day as a Republican to vote for you for governor. I'll give you the last few moments to make that case to them directly.
Yeah, I think Iowans First, this entire campaign has been one of a humbling experience for me and very honorable to be able to travel the state and to meet with you. We've held town halls all across the state, and it's been something that I didn't ever envision I would do in my life. But hearing the stories of Iowa's history, of the past, of the family farms, of the century farms, and of what our ancestors did to help build this place that we love has been something I will never forget. And so first, just thank you to the people who have showed up to hear from us. We are really trying to tackle these long-term systemic issues, the issues that we all see every day, but oftentimes we do not feel like we have politicians or regulators that are getting our back on these issues. I mentioned a few of them, data centers or refundable tax credits to companies that are cutting jobs. I'm here to put Iowa and Iowans first. That's my entire goal of this campaign. I'd be honored to have your support on June 2nd. I would ask you to go out and vote. And when you do, think about the 30, 40, and 50 year long-term picture of our state. I'd be honored to have your support.
Thank you for the time and the extended conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Zach Lahn, our guest. He is a Republican, one of 5 in the primary. And again, that primary election is June 2nd. You can learn more at his website, which is zachlahn.com. And that brings us to the close of another edition of Iowa Talking Points, the candidates. Thank you, as always, for being with us.
This has been Iowa Talking Points, the candidates, produced by Studio 5 at Mud Advertising, Totally Iowa Media, and News Talk 1540 KXCL. For more information on this series, go to iowatalkingpoints.com.